Good morning, everybody. Just continuing on sort of the topic on assistive technologies. So we've saw my disclosure, so I am robotic inclined and I have an affiliation with one of the companies. But surgical robots, this is not just my impression, this is the impression of the world, that robots are making their way into surgery, not just orthopaedics, but all forms of surgery. And this is an analysis from late last year on where the industry is as far as company involvement. And look at the orthopaedics. Orthopaedics has the most interest amongst the companies. Automation is not the enemy, gentlemen and ladies. We have had automation enter just about every industry that we have, and it has never left. So once it enters an industry, it stays. The car industry, the airlines industry. I sat here yesterday and listened to my learned colleagues talk on knees, and we looked at many complex cases, and I was a little dismayed to hear the end comment that there was really no enthusiasm for robotics amongst a very erudite panel. Computer assistance is not the enemy, yeah? Two of the people on the panel yesterday or involved in the talks yesterday drive racing cars that have computer assistance in them. 40 years, or 30 or 40 years is not a long time. I've been doing orthopaedics probably, or certainly medicine for 30, 35 years. And I was musing whilst I was listening to the talks yesterday, going back 30 or 40 years, thinking of Dad's Army. And for a moment there, I almost thought I was back watching the television. In 1989, I was a surgical registrar. I was a general surgical registrar, and that was just when laparoscopic surgery was entering the department. And there was a lot of concern amongst the general surgeons that were my bosses, that this was heresy, patients were dying from arterial rupture, and the consensus at that time was there was no enthusiasm for laparoscopic surgery. The second 6 months of my surgical year, I did vascular surgery. Same thing, my bosses said there was no enthusiasm for intravascular endoluminal surgery. Both of these things were proved wrong within 10 years. So we do need robotic assistance so that we can stop surgeons doing things differently. We need to stop saying that total knee is an art. We need to make total knee a science. Yeah, I echo or support lots of what David Liu just said, that we need to look at what we do, analyse how we do it and eliminate the variation. Yeah, so the robot is going to eliminate some of the variation that every surgeon in the panel had yesterday, because I think robots will minimise the variation and it will capture metadata. And with that metadata, like David alluded to, we are going to be able to analyse subsets of anatomy, subsets of manipulations of the surgeon's anatomy. So when we take a patient's anatomy and we change it and get complications, we've got to learn that and pass that back down to the junior surgeons. So Robotics 101, there's 3 parts to all robot systems. This is not unique to Stryker, this is all companies. There's a computer in your operating room, there's a navigation unit in the operating room, and then there's the big clunky machine, the robot. The least important part of the robotic sequence is the robot. The computer is everything. This is the sexy part. This is the part that makes robotics, that makes enhanced navigation work. So there's 3 steps in robotic knee replacements, yeah? Enhanced preoperative planning. So yesterday my learned colleagues talked about the importance of planning. Well, I would argue that none of them can plan to the accuracy of this with 3D modelling and preoperative planning. I can plan my femoral component accurately, I can plan my tibial component accurately, I can plan the femoral flexion accurately, I can get simulated bone cuts. I know what my knee is going to look like before I open the saw. I can plan whether I want my alignment to be mechanical, whether I want it to be constitutional or somewhere in the middle. I know all that before I've opened my saw. I guarantee no one on yesterday's panel can template their knees like this and see sagittal 3-dimensional morphology to see how well I'm resurfacing the medial condyle, how well I'm resurfacing the trochlea, what I do to the lateral condyle when I do mechanical axis. So that lateral condyle has been distalized 3 or 4 or 5 millimetres. That's why we get patellar maltracking, not because of the patella. Intraoperative flexibility is the other advantage. So when I'm doing my knee, I get an idea of what my gaps are going to be with those preliminary drawings, but intraoperatively I'm going to analyse the medial and the lateral soft tissue sleeves and I'm going to get an estimate of my gaps. So when I do my conventional knee, I get a feel for my gaps, but I don't quantify it. But with the robot, I know exactly what the numbers are going to be. I know I've got 20 millimetres on the lateral gap in extension, I've got 18 on the medial gap. I know the dimensions of my gap asymmetry. And so right now, I am still in the operating theatre, but I have not opened my saw. So I have the opportunity to get either my knife out and start cutting ligaments to make those gaps equal, or I have the opportunity to reassess my plan and maybe alter my plan, just in a minor way, before I take my knife. So I would caution the surgeons, I want them to leave the knife on the operating table and reassess your plan. Because I want to use the term of individualised alignment or balanced alignment. Every one of us has a compromise on the operating table. We compromise our soft tissues, or we compromise our alignment, or we compromise our joint line, or we compromise our femoral component positioning. So balanced alignment is a concept that I sort of adhere to now, because you're making sensible decisions before you implement them. So don't get your knife out yet. Wait, and let's have a look at our preliminary plan. So this is my plan, mechanically neutral knee. John Inser will be proud of me doing this. This is my plan, but I have not executed it yet. I'm in the operating theatre, I've got my gaps. So there is a 20 millimetre gap on the lateral side, and there's an 18 millimetre gap on the medial side in extension, and in flexion it's 22 millimetres laterally and 16 millimetres. So I have significant gap asymmetry, I have trapezoidal gaps. But just imagine if I recut that tibia, not at neutral, but if I recut that tibia at 2 degrees varus, I'm going to take a couple of millimetres off that medial tibia. So I am automatically, before I do it, I'm going to loosen my medial extension gap by 2 millimetres. So I've gone from having a trapezoidal gap to having a square gap, a rectangular gap, by adjusting my tibial cut before I do it. So if we look at the flexion gap, so that tibial recut, that 2 degree varus recut, is going to help my flexion gap as well. So instead of being 16 millimetres, now my flexion gap will be 18 millimetres. I've loosened the medial side with that tibial recut. So now I've got almost rectangular gaps. I'm not quite rectangular in flexion. I've still got a tight medial side. So imagine if I could externally rotate that femur just a little. If I could do that to it, I would loosen my medial side again to 20, and I'd actually tighten up my lateral side a little bit. So between those three little manoeuvres, I've gone from trapezoidal gaps to rectangular gaps, and I have not asked for the saw yet. I have not made any cuts on the bones. I have readjusted my plan. I have not gone near a knife to release the medial collateral ligament. We have just enhanced the plan before we've executed it. So I would think all those people yesterday that didn't like robots would now say, nice job, Dermot, you've balanced the knee beautifully. But I just have not opened up a knife blade. So it's only now that you get the saw in. So the saw, the robotic part of this, is not the sexy part. The sexy part is the ability to readjust your plan. So robotic-assisted knee replacement gives you that intraoperative flexibility, so you can balance the knee not with a knife, but you can balance the knee with your saw, recut the bones. So I think yesterday's Dad's Army would say, I think we like the robot, and this was actually a meeting the other night of the new APAS Robotic Society. Thank you.